Okay, so this morning we obviously had some issues. Not many people showed up for class, and I completely understand why. I think that there was some confusion the way the situation was handled by campus security, where they sent out a thing saying that all classes were canceled. Most universities would immediately in that text say all classes have moved to online instead of being canceled. So, because we still have to make up the time. So we did have a class this morning. We sort of checked the box. This is the content that, or much of the content that I would have given in the class. So I'm just going to go over it quickly here. We're still kind of responsible for this content. So if there's questions after this, we can talk about it maybe next class or the class after. But let's just go over. So to start with, we're beginning to talk about sort of transition from one generation to another. And there's a few things that we should look at, like what are the attributes that we want to see in this generation, and what's the profile of a successful successor. So what does a person look like who can actually become a good second CEO or third CEO within the family? So let's start with some attributes here. All right. And maybe we should back up before I get into the attributes. What I want you guys to think of is, what is the company's brand? And if you really get into marketing and how most marketers see the term brand, they don't see it as a logo or an image, right? It helps the brand, but that's not the brand. The brand is the promise of what it's like to do business with you from someone outside looking in, and their belief in that promise. So what we often see is like a personality or a sort of a belief structure of what they want the company to look like. So when you're thinking about brand, you got to think about, how do people perceive us, and how do we want to be perceived? And so some of the attributes you want in that brand is integrity, right? If you're known for integrity and commitment, people will search you out. People will come to look to do business with you. You won't have to be begging people to do business. Integrity is a long-term play. So in the short term, maybe you make less money on a deal, but it's the right thing to do, right? Well, people begin to see that, and that pattern develops over time. Over the long term, people seek you out, and it's a better long-term play. You want your employees to respect people as individuals within the family. So, not that they're expected to, because respect is earned, right? So you want your progeny to exude the sort of personality that people respect, right? You want to see that they have good critical thinking skills, that they make good decisions, that they weigh things out carefully, that they're not just shooting from the hip, right? That they're competent in what we would call emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is one of those things that you can build over time. Many people seem to have a natural level of it, but it's something that can be built up. And that's understanding your own emotions, understanding other people's emotions, and understanding how to manage both, right? So are they competent in interpersonal skills? Are they competent in emotional intelligence? And do they have the domain skills necessary to do the job that they're being put into? So, do they understand sales? Do they understand finance? Do they understand marketing? Do they understand operations? Do they understand human resources? Do they have technical skills for the industry, right? What are those domain skills that are necessary to do this job? And do we have those in that individual, or can we build those, right? So then if we start taking a look at the profile of these successful successors, they know the business well, and they may even like it or love it, right? So you don't have to like it or love it. It could be just a job, right? It helps a lot, though, if you like it and love it, because usually to have a successful business, you go beyond working 40 hours a week, So if you like it, or love it, that becomes a lot less painful and you're a lot more engaged when you're there. All right? They know themselves. And this goes back to the emotional intelligence thing. They understand where their strengths and weaknesses are, and they're willing to accept it. They're not major league egotists, right? So they have experience, they have skills, they understand where their gaps are, and they're willing to bring in other people to fill those gaps, right? They see, okay, now lead and serve. Okay, so this gets into different types of leadership. Some leaders lead with an iron fist, right? Think of Vladimir Putin, right? That's one way to lead, right? Out of fear, Genghis Khan. Another way to lead is what we call servant leaders, where you believe in your people, you trust in your people, and you see your job as to sort of provide a vision and to get all the roadblocks out of their way of helping you get there. So you see your job as not being superior to the people that you lead, but in service of the people that you lead. So that's a very distinct difference in perspective. And that's probably what you want in a family business, because you want people to want to participate, not be afraid of you or whatever. So, okay. They're guided by the previous generation, by advisors, and by an outside board or outside directors. So you don't just want family members, you want outside people too who have domain skills or strategic skills. But you also want these next generation to appreciate the intelligence that got them to where they are, right? These people who have made a successful business, now it may not be the most successful business, but the fact that most businesses fail gives you something that says you should respect what these people have done and respect their knowledge and understanding of what's going on. And take that. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to do it exactly the way they would do it, but at least hear them and understand their perspective, right? So you have good relationships and abilities to accommodate others, especially who are part of the successor team. So you have good relationships with everybody, but you want the team, that's sort of bringing you on to also have good relationships with. They count on competent non-family managers in top management team so you want not only, okay, so here's the thing, you don't just hire because you're part of the family, you hire for skill. And so you're going to find that no matter how big the family is, no matter how competent the family is, there's probably going to be spaces where you need people from the outside to fill the gaps of your abilities or competence. So you have to be willing to do that. Have controlling ownership, or can lead through allies. Okay, so you have to have the formal authority to make the decisions, right? So whether or not it's because you have 51% of the company, or because you have agreement among people who have the voting rights. Let's imagine, for example, I know one family business where it was started by two brothers, and the next generation, they have one from either side who are also now partners in the business, right? So those coming up, those next generation co-CEOs, both are, fortunately, they have a good relationship. Both agree with each other very often and will, challenge each other on points, right? So between the two of them, they have the authority to lead together. And oftentimes in the situation like that, you split authority, right? You have the common company goals, right? But you say, okay, you're in charge of this part of the business, you're in charge of that part of the business. Let's get together and talk about the business as a whole. And so that also, can be done. So you have to have some sort of authority to lead, whether or not it's completely controlling the company or whether or not it's some sort of coalition you've developed or splitting of formal authority. They've earned the respect of non-family employees. That goes back to that first point, right? Non-family employees, also suppliers, customers, other family members. So there's got to be some sort of respect there. They have the skills that the business needs, or they can manage the skills. So, for example, If you're in a construction company, you may not be a great, may not be good on mechanical design, right? But you have a team that advises you on that, right? You have the abilities to gather those skills and to manage those skills. You know enough about the mechanical design of issues that you can help, with the help of someone who's an expert, manage that part of the business. And the respect the past and focus. Okay, we've talked about that. All right. So let's talk about family culture. Now, culture is a weird thing. Right? And I think we've touched on this a little bit, but culture is a weird thing. Culture is like a set of shared values and shared practices. And so culture helps us in a lot of ways. And one of the things I've written about in some of my books is I said, culture watches your employees when no one else is watching them. Culture watches the family when no one else is watching. So you look at a family culture, a strong family culture, and people know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable within this group. And so culture dictates that. And it dictates that through, over time, we have a set of shared values and shared understandings and shared approach to life, right? That we are willing to live by as a group. And culture is driven from the top down, right? The leaders are the ones who say, this is what I believe in, and I want to understand what you believe in, and let's together come to an agreement on what we believe in, right? And so that's led from the top, and then it's demonstrated in how you actually live your life. You don't just say it, you do it. And we talked about this, we talked about Elizabeth Holmes and that sort of thing. The value statement is, these are our values. Well, no, you can say those are your values, but it's not only those things you say, but it's those things you actually do. Right? And when you get into sort of entrepreneurial families, there is an entrepreneurial culture, right? One of the things you'll notice is that the children, I should say entrepreneurs are often children of entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial type people who have that sort of ilk. So you may not have had a successful business, but you've always sort of experimented with things and tried new things and were a little adventuresome, right? But you'll find that many successful entrepreneurs had entrepreneurial parents. It's a cultural thing. It sort of permeates. And so you've got to understand that you want to build that into the culture and not just be safe, not just take the safe route, but understand how to be a good entrepreneur. And then we've, some of these structures, you don't have to have primogeniture, right? That it could be, right? It could be that the oldest is the best, but it could be that the oldest is not, right? It could be that the oldest is, just for whatever reason has less skills and abilities than someone further on down the chain of available next generation people. So there's they've got, do they have the qualifications? Do they have the passion? Do they have the talent? Do they have the willingness to both follow and lead, right? From family members and non-family members. So that's got to be built into the culture as well. A willingness to accept non-family members in leadership positions or to contribute. Okay, some challenges for the later generation. Shadow of the founder. Okay. When I was thinking about this, it brought to mind, a few years back, I was at a graduation party for a young man that I'm very close to. I showed up, and it was a barbecue, right? I was wearing a sweatshirt that was a Harvard sweatshirt, because at the time I was writing for Harvard Business Publishing. And he looked at me and he said, "Could you make it any harder?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, here I am, I'm graduating, I'm terrified." I was like, "Why are you terrified?" Now, you have to understand, this kid came from a fairly successful family. His father was an Ivy League graduate. His father was an All-American. His father was is just a generally good guy and had a successful business. And he's like, "Am I prepared to take this over? Am I prepared to live up to the examples that my father gave me?" I have to understand, this kid went to Brown. was an Ivy League kid. This kid was the captain of the Brown lacrosse team. He was a significant athlete. Yet he was terrified of his ability to live up to the previous generation. And this is not uncommon with successful parents. By the way, it's been several years since this, and the kid's done exceptionally well. Side story, right? But that's a common problem. That if you have successful parents, you feel this tremendous pressure to live up to that. Not only that, but the people around you oftentimes put the pressure on you by saying, oh, your dad was great, or your mom was great. And so you feel this shadow hanging over you, and this fear that you may not be judged sufficient, right? So that's a big deal. And you've got to find a way to make sure that, yes, it's there. Yes, there is this history, and it's a good history, but you're good too, and you're fine, and you're more than capable of this, and you've proven it, right? You got to sort of give people an opportunity to understand that it's okay for that. Okay, there's lingering. So maybe dad was great. Are you going to be great? Prove merit versus nepotism, right? So nepotism, again, is when you actually get the job only because you're part of the family, only because you're related to the people making the decision. You got to prove that you've done this, right? That's a challenge, that you're good, that you're qualified, that you would have, if you were not part of the family, you'd be getting this job, right? So prove that you've got merit. All right, now this is another big problem. And in psychology, there's something called the endowment effect, where the thing that you actually have, you seem to give that more value than the things that you don't actually have. So if I was, the way that oftentimes they'll do this is they'll give people a choice of an item. Like to say, you could have this coffee mug or you could have this T-shirt, right? And then they'll later on go back to them and say, would you be willing to trade that for the other, right? And they somehow or another put an exceptionally large value on the thing that they already have and over the thing that they don't have. This is a study that's been done over and over and over again, and it always comes out that way. When you're looking at the family business, is the current direction of the business, is the current levels of success that you had what you want to have for the future? It may have been that when the founders founded the business, this was the best opportunity for the resources that the family had. And that was great, and it was successful. However, over time, the industry may have changed, the family may have changed, the environment may have changed, and maybe it's no longer the best use of those assets. And so you have to be willing to take a look at the world with a set of fresh eyes and say, yes, we've been successful here, but we need to maybe look in another direction for the future. All right. And then there's a resistance to change, especially under the conditions of great success of the previous generation. Kind of what I was just talking about, the endowment effect. Okay. Let's talk about the managing interdependence. So family members are dependent upon each other. How do you establish that? How do you manage that? And so maybe it's to have a regular conversation about what the goals are of the organization and what the individual's goals are. And so make sure that our goals are sort of aligned. And reflect on the organizational chart and the different roles that we've established. Because especially if there's multiple family members, what is their role and who's reporting to whom, and is this the right way to do this? And it's not just the business relationship, there's also the family relationship. How do we manage that and make sure that that stays aligned? Develop procedures that reduce relationship wear and tear. So how do we make sure that we maintain a relationship even when we're doing business together? Establish forums for discussion, right? So We need to be able to have a way that we regularly get together and go over what's going on and what people like, what people don't like, what people see, what people don't see, right? And there has to be, make sure that whoever is running the organization has the authority to run, but looks at that as a responsibility, not as a gift. Okay, so when you're training the next generation, heirs should learn early. We should get them working. We've talked about this already. Provide youngsters with opportunities to teach them financial responsibility, compensate young employees for their business. Remember that when you pay them, you should be paying them market value. Okay, now, if anything, you should pay them on the low side of market value. And that's actually more difficult than it sounds, because you don't want it to be perceived that they're getting overpaid. And it also helps you in the long run, because employees begin to recognize what's going on. Even if they don't know exactly what you're being paid, they recognize that, little Billy isn't driving a Ferrari, and no one in his position should be. So over time, that's a good thing to do. Train people that they're paid and compensated based upon the value that they create within the organization. And if we look at, so the commitment the next generation has to the business, right? So there could be dependent. This is the lowest level of commitment. You do this because you really don't have any other choice. It's a safe career, and you're trying to make sure that you join the firm and you just get this. It's nice and safe, and you don't have to worry, right? But you're really dependent upon the company. You may not be able to get this level job anywhere else. Calculated. And this is where you start taking a look at the value of your ownership stake and the value of not doing this job, and you say, okay, this is probably the most remunerative. Like, I can make the most money doing this. I don't really want to be here, but it's financially, it makes sense, right? Then you look at normative, right? It would make mom happy if I joined the family business. It would make dad happy if I joined the family business, right? That would be normative. And then finally, the best is the effective. And effective is, I really want to be here. I've really decided that this is a great career for me, and I'm enjoying this opportunity. So that's where you'd love to see people, but you don't always get there. So hopefully that could be a way that you go, but it's not necessarily going to work out that way. All right, let's take a look at some of the things from Chapter 7. If we look at this, we've got the governing of the institution. All right, so let's start with the board or the directors or an advisory board. Now, I think there's confusion about what the difference is between these two, so I kind of laid this out a little bit. So a board of directors has oversight, right? They have authority. They can be the ones, and maybe we should find a way to move this down a little bit. They're a governing body, right, of the organization. Their responsibility is setting the overall strategic directions, overseeing management, ensuring the organization's success. They are the ultimate decision-making body on big decisions. So if you're about to buy a new building, you probably run it by the board, right? You're going to buy a new car for the sales manager, maybe not, right? Depending upon how big the company is. It could be. If the company's small, that could be a major decision. The board also has the ability to fire the CEO in most cases, right? So they have this sort of legal responsibility. So the board has legal responsibilities. Let's sort of narrow this down a little bit too, so we can read this a little bit better. The board has legal fiduciary responsibilities. Fiduciary meaning that you are responsible for this, and you're supposed to do it in the best interest of the people that you're taking care of, right? So they have legal and fiduciary responsibility to act in the best interest of the organization and its stakeholders, including and ensuring compliance with laws, protecting assets, and making decisions that prompt long-term organizational health. right? So the board has got legal and, oh crap, let's see. The board has got sort of this legal and fiduciary responsibilities. They have decision-making authority, so they have the authority to say yes or no on a lot of things. All right. They have a formal structure, right? So there's a chair, there are officers, there's defined roles and responsibilities. Okay, an advisory board is different. This is a group of people who have explicit expertise. They may or may not be paid. Very often advisory boards are just friends that get together and agree to help you out, right? And they'll give you their opinions on things. Their advice is non-binding. They may tell you should do this, and you go, I don't think so. Where the board can say you have to do this, right? So it's not, and they have no legal responsibility, but the board does have legal responsibility. So the board can be held liable and can be sued. And this is very flexible, and it's not necessarily formal. So there's a big difference between a board of directors and an advisory board. Advisory is just, hey, I'm here to help you out. I'll give you some of my personal advice. I like you, right? This is occasional. This is not every day. Board of directors, much more formal. Board of directors, much more authority. Okay, family council, we've talked about this. If you have a very large family, you might say, I'll have representatives from the different branches of the family get together and act like a senate, right? Because we want to get it down to a point where we can actually have this discussion. You could have a family assembly, which is the bigger group, usually like the whole group, where everyone gets together and they find out about things. So this could be, if you got 100 family members who are part of this, they show up for the big family meeting, the family assembly, right? Where that same company may have only 8 or 10 people on the family council, right? So you have an annual shareholders meeting, which goes over as if you've got shares in the company. Maybe you're sharing the formal financial information, the marketing information, the direction of the company, all that sort of stuff. And the management team includes top-notch non-family members very often in making some of the big decisions, especially if you need someone with specific skills that you don't have within the family. Okay, when we look at transferring power, the CEO must be involved in this, or should be involved in this. The CEO must agree with what's going on here and be willing. Otherwise, it gets very messy. It can be problematic if the CEO does not want to leave. You might fire a CEO, right? You might have particularly this, like if the guy's doing a terrible job, the board says you're doing a terrible job, we're going to fire you. If this guy doesn't want to leave, that could start a whole world of drama that you don't necessarily want to get into. So you've got to make sure that they agree to leave, even if they do it unwillingly. They fail to prepare the next generation for leadership. So if we've seen this with some of the cases that we had where they haven't even talked about this, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're dropping the company on this unsuspecting person, and that's not a formula for success. Success is triggered by illness or death. Now, this can happen, right? Dad's relatively young. He's, in his early 60s or something, but he has this untimely heart attack. You weren't thinking you were going to have to take over. Now you're looking at taking over the company, and you haven't really thought about it or prepared for it. The transfer must be uniquely designed, for each family business, right? Based upon the situation that you're in, based upon the talent pool that you have, based upon the family relationships, you're going to have a very different type of transition from one business to another. Okay, let's talk about the style of the CEO. The style of the CEO could be, I'm the king, right? And I make all the decisions, and I don't plan on ever leaving, right? They kind of see this as like till death. Great. That creates a problem. It creates a problem because even if they realize that someday someone else is going to take over, they may be in a position where they've hung on too long and haven't prepared anybody. Okay, you have the general, leaves reluctantly and sometimes plots their return, right? So you fire the CEO, but they're thinking, I can get back in here. I'll find a way to do this. Hopes the next generation of leaders will prove inadequate. Right, you've got the ambassador, allows others to learn the business firsthand and eventually manage it. So you're saying, great, come on in. Let's figure this out. Let's get you ready to go. You've got the governor, leads for a limited term and then moves on. Right, so they're sort of saying, great, this was my responsibility. I fulfilled my responsibility. Now it's your turn, right? And there may or may not be a good succession plan there. But at least they're willing to go. Okay, then you've got the innovator, or inventor, I should say, the inventor, and that, they take a key position in another enterprise. And then you got the transition czar who provides active leadership. So you have different roles these people could play. Okay, now what's the role of the spouse, right? The role of the spouse could be everything from not being involved at all in the business to being aware of what's going on and maybe providing some advice and personal opinions. Could be that they are capable, right? It might be that you have a very talented and skilled spouse who could one day take over as CEO. It could be that that person is not capable nor has no intention, right? So it could be this partner, could be the chief trust officer. This is where, like, you might have a matriarch who keeps the family together, and is worried about her participation in the business is that she understands it and knows the big picture of what's going on and keeps her eye out for anything that can create division within the family, and tries to make sure that doesn't happen. She could also be the keeper of the family values. Like, hey guys, I think you're going in the wrong direction here, and I don't think that this is what we really care about or where we want to be in the future, right? She could be a free agent, not interested at all. She could be the jealous spouse. I hate that business. It takes all my spouse's time, and I don't like it, and I don't want them to be involved in it, and I will be just as happy as this thing goes away, right? Or they could be the person who takes over when the spouse dies, or when the spouse is no longer capable, because they know everything and they've been an active partner. So there can be some very, very different roles here for the spouse. And these are all going to be involved in continuity of the succession, right? So I think we've covered most of the big things I wanted to cover in this. I think we'll talk about Chapter 8 maybe with our next class, and I want to make sure that we go over the cousins thing, and I think we can apply Chapter 6 and 7 to that in our discussion in the next class. So if we look at where we're going for the 13th, I think this is good. We'll make sure that we do the discussion of the case that we just read, the Cousins tournament, and we'll sort of catch me up on. I asked you for 2 different ideas, so the idea that you had and maybe a second idea. We'll catch up on where we are with those 2 ideas, and we'll go over chapters 4, 5, and 8 next time when we get together. All right. Any questions? You can email me, call me, text me. Love to hear from you. But if not, I will see you on the 13th. Take care.